Hi, and good afternoon from Jim O'Connell here on Education Matters. I appreciate you watching. If if you're watching live, it's the 16th of January, and it's 6 p.m. I say that because this program is repeated 6 times or whatever it is during the week. So there's a good chance that you're watching a recorded version. But if you are watching live, I'd appreciate if you would like to call in. The call-in number is 640-3091. That's area code 603-640-3091. Also, this program will be available on IPM Nation. Where you can view it and past episodes, etc., on there if you ever had an interest to do that. So today there are a number of issues. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, and so schools were off, and I'd like to deal with that in a second. But the issue of Senate Bill 193 is foremost in my mind, because there was a hearing in Concord today of the Finance Committee to review this bill. And for those of you who may not be aware of Senate Bill 193, it is a bill that would allow your tax money and mine to be used in private and religious and other schools, and for homeschooling purposes in the state of New Hampshire. And so some convoluted avenues are being taken in order to avoid the constitutionality problem here, but it still may not pass muster constitutionally, and is likely to be contested under the Constitution, under the New Hampshire Constitution, because the use of public dollars to support private or religious purposes is prohibited. The big picture is that the bill generally is, as I view it, it's part of what has been an ongoing attack on public education. Now, immediately, those people who support the bill will say, well, there you go. And I understand that, and just like I call it a voucher bill, because they don't want to call it a voucher bill, because, again, the rhetoric, the words mean something. And so but you can dance around these things. You can sort of call it like it is. This bill has been in the development stage for a long time under the present House, and it was developed. It took a lot of time, and up until about 3 weeks or so before Christmas, it had been delayed in coming to committee for vote, and in the end, the Republican caucus in Concord couldn't get its own members to support the bill. So by chipping away at it and by changing some pieces on it, they eventually came up with a solution that was enough to pass the Education Committee and go to vote. Now, I have to say that this bill was then going today, on the 16th of January, it was going before the Finance Committee, because this bill has got financial implications for the state. Now, separate than the implications it has for the city of Manchester and the implications it has for taking existing public funding from public schools and giving it to private schools and homeschools and religious schools. It would do that, but it also would create new expenditures to exist, and there is no money available to pay that money, because in order to allow this thing to pass, the bill would compensate a city like Manchester for anything above a quarter of 1% of whatever it might lose. So It's very complicated, so let me not get into the weeds too much. But what it means is this. So originally, the bill would have allowed an unlimited number, and it still does, an unlimited number of students to avail of this funding. So, and if they did, there would be a large sucking sound in school districts across the state. And that would have a major effect, because teachers would be lost and programs would be lost, and so that would have been they would have made it a more no votes. And so what the bill does is say that if a district loses anything more than a quarter of 1% of its total budget from the preceding year, the state will make up the difference. So, for instance, if 150 students in Manchester were to decide to avail themselves of this, that would be 1% of kids, and it would be 1% of the current budget. And the budget last year was 167 million, so 1% would be 1.67 million. Under this bill, Manchester, if 1% of students were to avail themselves of this, Manchester would lose $1.67 million worth of funding. The state would make up 3/4 of that. So Manchester would net lose 400,000, which, by the way, is 8 teachers. And the state would make up the other 1.2 million. The problem is the bill says it will do that, but it has no funding in place to do it. There's no source for that 1.2 million. That would have to be found somewhere in the general fund, or there'd have to be some spending not made in some other part of the state in order to fund it. And that would be repeated in town after town, place after place across the state. So, and that of course is just today, because the bill, once passed, could easily be changed to make it 0.5%, no percent, or whatever it is. So that was put in place, and it's fiscally irresponsible to pass a bill, if they do pass this bill, without contemplating the impact. So some have calculated the impact at $30 million for the state. Nobody will know exactly where the funds will how they'll fall until such time as it goes into effect, if it goes into effect. The other thing that was done to make this awful bill more palatable was that in order for a family or a parent to avail themselves of this public tax funding of their private schooling, they would have to be earning less than 300% of the poverty level. So that is 77,000 for a family of 4, husband and wife and 2 kids in the state of New Hampshire. So anybody earning under less than, say, 80,000, and if they have more than 2 kids, obviously it would go up proportionately. So anybody earning under that or less would qualify for this grant. So that by doing, it's not a grant, would qualify to actually get this money from the state public school coffers and put it in their own pockets. So if you earn a little around or just under 80,000 or less, you could find yourself getting this. But what that did was it eliminated the argument from people like me who said this is going to be availed of by people who send their kids to a Catholic school like, say, Bishop Girton, which is 12 or 13 or 14,000 a year. I'm not sure the exact number down there, or 10 or 11,000 at Trinity, or the 30,000 or 29,000 over at Derryfield, a private school. And these people would be stupid not to take the benefit, right? I mean, it would just make why wouldn't you take it? But nobody is sending their kids to Derryfield because they're getting an extra, $3,000 to $5,000 from out of the public purse. They're already spending 29 or 30 plus expenses to be there, so this is not going to determine that outcome. So you're giving money to the middle class and above, to the most wealthy people in the state. So by making it 300 times the poverty level, then for now, again, that's temporary because the next house could decide to increase that by 20% or 50% or anything it wants. So it's like the thin end of the wedge. You get this passed, and now you've created something, a new expectation that could be expanded in the future. So it is at 3 times the poverty level, so 77,000 or close to 80,000. So under this bill, there are the controls on this money are none of that is decided either. What is decided is that some private company will manage the process, and to do so, they will collect 5%. So now we are not just taking some millions of dollars out of the already semi-bankrupt public school system, but we're taking the money out, call it 10 million. And of that 10 million, we're going to give $500,000 to some nice private company. I'm sure they have somebody in mind sitting up in Concord who's going to manage this for the state and take their fee. And of course, that fee will go up over time as well. So now we have another private entity, sucking into the trough, which is public education. And then we have the fact that this bill could be used for homeschooling. And homeschooling, which is very problematic in the state of New Hampshire because there are no controls over the quality or the standards of what actually is going on in homeschooling. And I'm sure, without any doubt, that there are some wonderful people, I know some actually, who homeschool their kids in the state of New Hampshire. And for them, it may well be the best option. I mean, if you've got a qualified, talented mother or father who has the wherewithal financially, and they have the home for it and the space for it, and they say, we can do a good job, teaching our kids, and because it'll be one-on-one, we're going to do it that way, and that's going to be much better for my kid. I'll deal with the socialization and the sports and other things separately, but I'm good at what I do, and I'm going to be great at this. To me, that's like a carpenter saying he's going to, fix his own door, a plumber saying he's going to fix his own piping. If you are whether you have a qualification, I'm not saying you have to have a qualification in order to homeschool, but if you're qualified in the broadest sense, if you are good at that, then great. I think that's, whatever the number is, it's a very small minority of people. And yet we have some of the least qualified people I've ever met I've found to be homeschooling in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, frighteningly ignorant, paranoid, propeller hat people. Besides the well-intentioned and capable people, they're a subset of the group that just feel that my kids are going to be indoctrinated if they are put into public schools because they're government schools trying to brainwash my children. There's a big portion of that out there. I don't want my kids exposed to other ideas and thoughts, etc. There is a race issue. We'll go back to that in a minute. There's no question at all, but there are people who don't want their kids associating with the wrong kind of people, and whether that's race or economics or class or whatever it is, they clearly would prefer to have their kids isolated from that. So there are multiple constituencies of people who do that. And in the state of New Hampshire, the Department of Education has no control over, if I decide to homeschool my kids, and I bring them in I have 4 kids myself, and if I decide to teach them that the world is flat, that Copernicus, Galileo Galilei were all heretics, if I was a creationist and said that the world was only 5,000 years old, that Noah took every amoeba and insect in the world and every animal and all animals that ever existed and put them all on the ark, including, of course, the dinosaurs, and put them all on there and somehow rode this massive thing around the place. I teach them all this nonsense. I can teach them whatever it is. Whatever there is no NASA, that there were no moon landings, that whatever the boogeyman of the day is, I can teach them all that in New Hampshire, and there's nobody can say anything about it. Nobody can step in and say you're doing damage to these kids. You shouldn't. There's a minimum standard that you must teach them. Have you taught them to add 2 and 2 and 4 and 4? Have you taught them multiplication, addition, subtraction? Have you taught them geometry by the time they get to be 13 or 14 or whatever it is? There's nobody looking after that process. And now those people can go and take private money or take state money, taxation money, your money and mine, and use it for homeschool purposes. So if I've got 4 kids, if the kids are at the minimum, I would get about $3,500 per kid. So for 4 kids, I'd be getting $14,000. If the kids happen to be on free and reduced lunch, if we're poorer, then I'd be getting about $5,100 or around $5,000 per kid. So I'd get $20,000 to homeschool my kids. Now, there's a lot of the people who support this silly bill are the people who also support making Medicare recipients, which we heard last week, having Medicaid recipients, and New Hampshire is one of the states that wants to do this, having them have to work before they can receive Medicaid. And so, unless they can demonstrate that they are incapable of working, but yet we're now going to take a bunch of money out of taxpayers' pockets, and we will give it to somebody who perhaps is the most ignorant person you ever met. Maybe they have a mental health issue. Maybe they've got personal hygiene issues. Maybe they've got opiate abuse issues. Maybe they're just bad people issues. Maybe they're just not very moral people, whatever they may be. And we're going to hand them a bunch of public money that you and I worked hard to earn, and we're going to take it away from the public schools and we're going to hand it over here, and there's going to be nobody ask any questions. You're not allowed to ask. What did you do with the money? I'm not telling you. Did you teach your kids anything last year? I'm not telling you. How many hours a day did you teach them? I'm not telling you. It's just asinine. It's just a stupid thing to be doing. It is an attack on public education. The last time we had a fully Republican-dominated House and Senate in New Hampshire under Bill O'Brien 6 or 7 years ago, we had 43 bills introduced attacking public education. 43. And only for Governor John Lynch vetoing some of those pieces of legislation, our system would have been decimated back then. Some of those bills, for instance, had the idea was to change the definition of adequacy in the state of New Hampshire so that the state would only contribute towards, not pay the entire amount, but from going forward, it was only going to contribute to reading, writing, and arithmetic. So whatever a town might spend, it wanted to redefine the idea of what an adequate education was, so that it was able to say to towns and cities, all of that stuff, art, music, literature, computer science, foreign languages, all of that, no, we're not funding any of that. So lots of really silly, stupid stuff. And we find ourselves today with a Republican-controlled House, Republican-dominated Senate, and a Republican governor who, I guess, have to give some sops to the far right. Now, what is disturbing to me about all of this is that is the way in which it is being done. Most fiscal conservatives would view any bill coming to be enacted in the state of New Hampshire to be financially and fiscally responsible before it is enacted. And so, if you know, as a public representative in the State House in New Hampshire, that a bill is going to have a financial impact, and if you have not made an effort to find out how much that will be, and furthermore, you have no provision there in order to pay the actual cost of it, because once you pass the bill, the cost is coming. It's just a question of whether it's $10 or $100 million, and you don't know which it is. and some of the best advice tells you it's going to be $30 million. But you're going to vote yes for it anyway because it's part of your political ideology, and you've never met a public school yet that you don't dislike enough that you'd like to defund it. I don't know how the debate went today in Concord on the finance side, but the bill, depending on what happened in the finance committee today, the bill will be up for a vote in the coming weeks in Concord, and I would urge people, anybody listening to this program, to go and to communicate with their public representatives and to communicate with Governor Sununu. And, in the end, if it's enacted and he signs it, I would like him to own it. Because if it ends up being the fiasco that I expect it to be in the long term, then I would like it to be known as the Sununu Education Defunding Act, and not some sort of, well, I signed it and I didn't really know, because he needs to be told and he needs to understand so that if it's a great thing, then he gets the full benefit of if it turns out to be a glorious thing, and people can say, well, this is something that Governor Chris Sununu did for us. I think if it's the boondoggle that I think it is, and if it costs the public education system in the state the way I think it will, then I would like it to be the Chris Sununu boondoggle, that this is what he did to public education during the term he was there. This wonderful, our wonderful representative Mary Heath, who's been on the school committee for years, wrote a piece in the I think it was on Foster's. Let me see if I can find seacoastonline.com, and it's entitled "Stop the Dismantling of New Hampshire Public Schools." And I'd like to read a little bit of Mary Heath's comments for a second. But before I do, I'd like to mention a state representative here in New Hampshire, here in Manchester, and that is Representative Barbara Shaw. And Barbara Shaw is an alderman in Manchester. She is a former teacher. She's a long-time alderman. She's a Democrat, and she also sits on the Education Committee. And she was the lone Democrat on the committee to vote in favour of this going to the floor to be voted upon. And I don't want to get into any. I said on social media to Barbara, and some discussion was going on the other day. I sent Barbara Shaw a message, and I don't, it has nothing to do with questioning Alderman Shaw's anything, her ability, her history, her knowledge of education. I'm not casting any stones on Barbara Shaw, other than the one stone that I do have here metaphorically in my hand, which I'm saying is I think it's a terrible vote. And so I don't want to get what happens on social media is people go off down these, scurrying off down these rabbit holes around, well, Barbara Shaw's a wonderful person and she's been no one's questioning that. I'm not talking about that. And I just want to talk about one fact, which is this is an awful vote, and it's unjustifiable. So I did invite Alderman Shaw to come on this show, and or I told her on any other venue too, but I specifically both wrote her in an email and I left a telephone message for her and asked her to come on this show to talk about it. Not because I want to be confrontational. I am not happy about it, but I'm not happy about lots of things, and there are lots of people I disagree with, but I would be happy to have Barbara Shaw on here to explain why she thinks this is such a great bill, because I think it's an awful bill. And I think it was a serious error on her behalf, and people make errors in that. So just to be clear, it's not personal, it's a terrible bill. I've invited her on here, and I'd like to hear her side of the story. And she's very welcome to come on. Like I said, I've asked her and I haven't had a response, and that was more than a week ago or maybe 2 weeks ago. So I did see her on Joe Kelly Levasseur, with Joe Kelly Lavasseur's show, talking about it there sometime in the last couple of weeks. And again, sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone, and if you want to be in the echo chamber, then you're in the right spot right there. So I want to quote Mary Heath because she's spoken about this. A number of other people have addressed this. Kathy Staub did. The people at Reaching Higher New Hampshire have. This piece here from Mary Heath is as follows. It says, last week, New Hampshire Republicans moved one step closer toward dismantling our state's public school system in favour of a voucher programme that will divert funds from public schools to unregulated private, parochial and religious schools. So, according to Mary Heath, right, New Hampshire Republicans moved one step closer toward dismantling our state's public school system. Now, just to be very clear here, if you think that's an exaggeration, and it may be debatable in this bill, but I could bring you to people in Concord who are Republican state reps who will tell you to your face that the government has no place in education, that there should be no public education. These people have votes and they vote on your behalf. That there should be no public education, that it's an unconstitutional act of government. That's right from the lips of a Republican member of the House. Not from 500 years ago, not some Neanderthal, but an actual representative who sits in the House today. And he's not alone. Just think about that. That there should be no public schools. If you go out and have children, and you better have the money to pay to educate them, and if you don't, then that's your tough, because the government has no business teaching them. That's one of the votes that will vote in favour of this. So whether Mary Heath is correct and whether she's exaggerating or not in this sentence, and I don't believe she is for a minute, it's indisputable, because I can prove it, I know it myself, that there are people whose aim is to dismantle the public schools. And if you go and you look at the minutes of the Manchester School Board and some of the public comments there, you will see people who have come before that board in the past, and they've talked about that our public schools are ungodly and that they need to be eliminated. That that evidence has been given by members of the public who have come to speak before our school board. The head of the Tea Party in one of the towns just south of Manchester went on record as saying that public schools were an unconstitutional exercise of government. So that all sounds like conspiracy theory madness, because most normal people who are at home, chopping the spaghetti or making their sauce or getting dinner ready, and who have who might have the TV on listening to this, would be like, that guy's out of his mind. There's nobody. That's not true. There's nobody who thinks there should be no such thing as public school. And I'm telling you categorically, not because I'm one of the lunatic fringe who makes stuff up, but there actually are. I was in the presence of a Manchester rep, Victoria Sullivan, who voted for this bill, a Republican committee person on the Education Committee. And she and I last year were, and she and I, Victoria and I, disagree. We certainly disagree on this bill. But we were together going down in the elevator at the State House, and there was a state rep. There were just three of us in the elevator. And the state rep who was with her made it very plain that to both of us that as far as he was concerned, whatever bills came up, that he didn't support public education, so he was voting against public education any chance he could get. Now, I don't know if he's got 100 friends up there or whether he's got 10. But it is not a fallacy and is not made up. I'm sure that Victoria remembers that conversation, and the gentleman who was talking about it and could verify it for you if you were to ask her. So, Mary goes on to say, instead of investing in making our public schools better, the financial burden of Senate Bill 193 will be absorbed by the state's excellent K-12 public school system that educates nearly 90% of New Hampshire children. Now remember, this is especially egregious here in Manchester because Manchester is the least well-funded school system in the state in terms of spending per pupil. And we have the least number of teachers per pupil too, by the way. Senate Bill 193 is off to the House Finance Committee for hearing on the 16th at 1:30, and if passed, it will face a vote in the New Hampshire Senate in the coming weeks. SB 193 is disastrous for Granite State students and will create a segregated school system that prevents countless children from getting the quality education they deserve. It is unethical to send our state's children down an educational path that lacks research support. Also note that Senate Bill 193 funds a new private agency. Thank you to our Conservative friends. A new private agency to administer the programme using 5% of the bill's allocated funds. Should Senate Republicans pass this legislation, they will effectively encourage students to attend schools like the Tri-City Christian Academy. This school made headlines last year when they banned a student who was on track to be valedictorian from matriculating there because he was transgender. Under School Bill 193, schools with wide-ranging agendas will be able to judge, criticise and reject students who are different. And there's nothing to stop them from doing that. New Hampshire's constitution clearly states that citizens cannot be forced to support religious schooling, whether in a family home or at a religiously affiliated institution. Senate Bill 193 fails to abide by this responsibility. Furthermore, legislators do not know how much the programme might cost state taxpayers. No state in the nation allows parents to customise their child's public education more than New Hampshire, leading one to conclude that Senate Bill 193 is really about directing public monies to private schools. Senate Bill 193 is part of a broader conservative ideology that believes public schools should be replaced by a marketplace of private schools that compete for the vouchers. People don't like to hear that because they prefer to couch it in other terms, but in the end, that's where it's at. Senate Bill 193 will also disproportionately hurt students with disabilities. Unlike public schools that are required by law to account for all types of disabilities, private schools are under no such obligation. These schools are not required to be ADA accessible. They do not have teachers with proper special education training and may not be trained to provide students with different physical, mental or learning disabilities with a proper education. For these students, the right choice could mean huge risks and long commutes that parents can't afford. As legislators, it is our job to protect and strengthen our state school system. Instead of giving public money to private institutions, we should strengthen our public schools. Strong public education helps create generations of critically thinking and engaged students. It gives children the chance to thrive regardless of their gender identity, disabilities or economic status. With School Bill 193, Republicans are proposing a bill that will keep students from reaching their full potential. The whole idea of kids with special needs not being treated equally and properly under this bill is another important facet of it. Governor Sununu has backed this bill from day one. This doesn't come as much of a surprise given his pick of Education Commissioner Frank Edelblut. Edelblut has been a fierce advocate for a voucher system. He made his stance clear by donating money to causes he believes in, like the Croydon School Board's Legal Defence Fund when they illegally transferred education funds to a religious school. While this bill passed the House along party lines, it doesn't mean this fight is over. It is up to everyone, and it passed along party lines, on mostly party lines, I think we should say. It is up to everyone who cares about providing all students with a quality education to call their state senators and urge them to oppose Senate Bill 193. Call Governor Sununu at 603-271-2121. That's 271-2121 to register your opposition. Now is the time for all of us to work together to defend all of the children in New Hampshire. And I thank Mary Heath for that wonderful op-ed. And she represents Hillsborough District 14. So this idea that public funds be used for private schools is an abomination. If you look at the terrible tragedy that unveiled itself yesterday in California, where 13 adult and young children were found in this abusive home where they were chained to beds and locked up and all the rest of it. And please, I'm not in. don't be simplistic about this in your response. I'm not saying, oh, that's what's happening to kids here. I mean, it's a terrible thing. It's a once off. But I just want to make the point that a lot less degrees than that, not having to chain kids to beds or anything else, but simply having kids in an environment where they're not free to sort of or they're not exposed to broader thought, etc. There is no reason why, under this bill, why somebody couldn't take their as the money's laid out, $3,000 or $3,500 per child. If they're on free and reduced lunch, then about $5,000, and if they have some special needs, up to $8,000. So let's take the middle of those at $5,000. If I got 4 kids and I can get $20,000, I can keep my kids at home and not put them in school. And I don't have to report to anybody. I take the $20,000 away from, that's half a teacher. It's actually, so half a teacher in Manchester, just for me. And I take my kids out of the system. I homeschool them. Nobody knows what's happening to them one way or not. I could have them, doing nothing, or I could have them working, or I could be out doing another job while collecting that money. It's a farce. It flies in the face of everything that supposedly conservatives stand for. So please pay attention to School Bill, Senate Bill 193. On another topic, I had a meeting with, there was a meeting as part of Dr. Vargas's outreach to the community. He meets in various schools, etc. Each month. Let me see if we can get this month's schedule up. But last week it was at Hillside Middle School and at Beach Street School, and if I can see it, they do coffee and conversation on the website here. If oops. So anyway, at Hillside last week there was a meeting, and it was very. First of all, there were very few people there, as there had been at Beach Street the morning before. I commend Dr. Vargas for continuing this despite that. As I said to him at that meeting in Hillside, the day that there's a problem, this room will be full, and we'll have the burning torch and the shouting and the screaming going on for whatever the problem of the day is. But people are allowed an opportunity to meet with the superintendent, and in the next ones coming up will be February the 7th at 7:30 at Green Acres, and then February the 8th at 4:30 p.m. at West High School. Those are the next two, and then each month there's one morning, one afternoon. But it was interesting and educational to listen to what Dr. Vargas had to say. He talked about the redistricting subject, and it's something that is imminent, or is something that is being worked upon in the city. But the most important thing that he said was that no action should be taken unless it met one simple criteria, which was any action we're taking should be to improve educational outcomes for children. So I love to hear that was the first measure, that we shouldn't be doing any of this. There may be other reasons why you might do it, and good reasons, but the first principle that must be met is that whatever we do in the city of Manchester, we do in order to improve educational opportunities for our students. And so that tears away a lot of the rhetoric that goes on around redistricting. And for the record, as I've said before, I'm very supportive of the idea of redistricting the city of Manchester. I go back to my caution on this topic, which is that when you have 14,500 students and whatever number, an X number of teachers, however they're distributed, when you've distributed them in a more orderly fashion, so there isn't, too many kids bursting, it seems, at one school over here and more empty classes over there, that when you've redistributed them at their optimum, so that they're the most evenly spread, that, as I call it, the bottom right-hand corner of the spreadsheet, the number of students, there won't be one less or one more student in the schools. They'll just be in different places. And the number of teachers, there won't be one more teacher added into the system or taken away. So we'll still have the lowest number of teachers per student of any town in the state when the redistribution is finished. And I'm all for the redistribution. I want it to happen, because the sooner that can happen, the sooner we can move on with the debate about what we should do. The other thing, and I made the point to Dr. Vargas at this meeting, that I was worried that we would use the current circumstance of our schools and bake it in and make it permanent. And what I meant by that is this, is if those of you who were listening to me 6 or 8 months ago, we had a lot of classes in our elementary schools where we had 3 classes of 30 in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Now, because of the work done by the school board and Dr. Vargas in asking for and getting the $2 million above the $165 million that originally Mayor Gatsis had planned to give the school district, the school district was able to bring some teachers, move teachers, eliminate them from some of the high schools and bring teachers into the elementary schools. I think it was around 8 or so in the end. And we have 14 or 15 elementary schools. But we put them in, but it was enough to alleviate the worst of their problems. And so while we still have some class sizes that are very large, we at least did something to get rid of the very worst cases. Now, my point about the redistricting thing is that we had an architect or a consultant, a real estate person come in and look at our schools to see what capacity we had. And I've heard people say, oh, we've got hundreds of thousands of square feet of additional extra classroom, there's plenty of space. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not about space. And even if it were, the issue is that if you take a picture of a school which has got a 5th grade with 90 kids in it, and you've got 3 classes of 30, anybody in the right mind in a normal school district, that would be a maximum of 4 classes of 22 and a half. So even if you have an empty classroom in that school today, that classroom rightfully should have a teacher in it in that one grade. So that one grade should have 4 classrooms, not 3. So if you go into a Webster or a Smith Road or a Green Acres or a Goffs Falls or Gaza or wherever you want to go, and you look at the current distribution of space, numbers of kids per class, number of classes used, number of empty or underused classes if there are any, I was at pains to point out to the superintendent that I just want the math to be correct. But I worry about somebody who doesn't understand the nuance of this. They go into a school and they look at it as it exists today. They don't know that hundreds of teachers were fired over the last 5 or 8 years, and so they look and they find some empty classrooms and they're like, well, we've got additional capacity here. If we base our space requirements on the current distribution of teachers and students, then we're going to get it wrong. And we will end up, the day after we fired 164 teachers in Manchester, you could have gone to the 164 rooms. Now, this doesn't quite work in high school where teachers move from class to class and etc. But in a grade school, for instance, where it's one teacher, one class, if you eliminate, 5 teachers from each one of the schools in the elementary school in any given year, you've got 5 empty classrooms. And you could go in the week after you fired the 5 teachers and say, oh, look at all this extra room we have over here at Northwest. Look at all this extra room we have here at Green Acres. No, we don't have extra room. What we have is we have five teachers that were eliminated and 5 empty classrooms because the kids are packed like sardines into the other classes. I don't believe we've got kids packed like sardines anymore. There was a time we were doing that for a short while. But that's an important. I wanted to impress on Dr. Vargas the need for this. But I was impressed by him in his commitment to the idea that whatever is being done will be done, and that he claims that he will be able to make the argument that not just that this is educationally sound, as in we're doing no harm, but he took it to a different level. He said that this would be educationally advantageous to the kids. In other words, a net improvement. And that should, in other cities at other times, that might be a low bar. But in Manchester, it might be a pretty high bar. But I was very glad to hear it, and it wasn't the first time I've listened to Dr. Vargas and been pleased by some of the things he has to say. Now, actions speak louder than words, so we'll see what we actually get in the end. Because first of all, I'd like to see what he comes up with, and secondly, he doesn't get to act alone. In the end, he only gets to implement that which the school board decides to do. But it's very important as a principle that when we redistrict, we're not doing it to save money here. We're not doing it because the voices shouting the loudest are from one corner of the city or from one socio-economic group or from whatever else. But rather we're doing it to improve the educational outcomes of the children. Another important note that Dr. Vargas continues to maintain and say and assert is that we must look at the outcomes of every child. Every child. And that's very important in the city of Manchester, because those of us who are lucky, or those of you who are lucky enough to have kids who are AP students, who are top performers, who are excellent learners, etc. First of all, God bless you and good luck. That is, it's wonderful. I'm delighted for that, and for those kids, that's fine. But we as a community have an obligation to all the kids in the city of Manchester, and that's another note that Dr. Vargas constantly brings. And so we'll see what we get from redistricting. I hope it happens soon. I hope it happens quickly, and so we can move on to talking about other things in the city. I'd like to talk for a minute as we come towards the latter the last quarter of the show here, about Martin Luther King Day yesterday. And from an education point of view, Martin Luther King Day is an opportunity for schools and students and parents and families across the United States to take a step back and to contemplate issues like race and equity and the fairness of our education system and of our government and of our society. And I think it's unfortunate, it's beyond unfortunate, it's infuriating that our conversation this year about race and fairness and equity in the state of New Hampshire and across the country, that debate was usurped and coloured by the awful rhetoric of our President Donald Trump. And I recognize that 30% or 3 in 10 of those watching this program support President Trump for one reason or another, and that's your right, and fine. It doesn't stop, while recognizing your right to do that, it doesn't stop me from expressing my concern, my dislike, my disappointment, my not quite anger, but bordering anger at the place to which this president has brought the United States and its conversation. And so instead of having an enlightening, fulfilling, uplifting conversation about the greatness of America's future, the greatness of its achievements thus far, its movement towards a never-ending move towards improvement and eventual, I don't know if perfection, but an attempt at it, that instead of that conversation and a conversation about inclusiveness and about love, instead of concentrating on the statements of Martin Luther King like darkness cannot be undone by darkness, only light can do that, Hatred cannot be undone by more hatred. Only love can do that. That's a very powerful statement, one of many great statements from, in the end, a man who was religious and a reverend, as well as being an orator and a wonderful statesman and civil rights leader. And of course, his other statement was that one of his many statements, but one that comes to mind is the one about so long as there is injustice anywhere, then there cannot be justice. There cannot be justice anywhere. I think so long as there is injustice anywhere, there is not injustice. There is not justice anywhere. So we can never have full justice, even for ourselves, if we can look over there and see a place where there is injustice. And so the idea that a president would not just, I don't care about the S word. I do care about the S word a lot, actually. That may not be false. The idea that such profanity would emanate from the White House, and so publicly. The idea that a whole groups of people, whole countries, would be maligned out of the White House. This, the most powerful office in the world, the hope and the aspiration of many peoples in lots of places. The idea that America is a country based on equality and fairness and equalness under the law and equal opportunity, and that we take the rough and the rugged, the hard-working and the willing, and bring them to our shores, and they're the people that go on to make America great. We were able to sit here and look back across the oceans and represent that while you may quarrel and argue and find it difficult to coexist in other parts of the world, and what is wrong with you that you cannot do it, come to our shores, come here, and be part of making America the great country that it is and that it can be. And all that rhetoric, and it goes on for generations, and it has become more true as time went on. It was clearly not true during the time of slavery. It was clearly not true during the time of Manifest Destiny. It was not fully true when women didn't have the vote. It has never been fully true, but the ideal and the striving towards it were real and are real. I find it terribly depressing that the conversation in the United States on Martin Luther King Day of the year 2018 is about race and color and our view and xenophobia and hatred and dislike, etc. I find it appalling. I made a point to somebody on social media today about the fact that they were making apologies for President Trump, and I make no apologies for him in this regard. It isn't the word. The word is horrible anyway. It's the fact of what the words meant and that they were said. And if somebody who had the attitudes and the foul-mouthedness and the history of bad behavior that President Trump has, if that person were to come to my house, and I'd like to think yours, they wouldn't be welcome after 5 minutes. If your son or daughter were to come home from college or to come home from school or to arrive back after a number of years being in the work world to introduce you to their proposed partner that they're introducing you to and said, Dad or Mom, here's the guy I've met that I think I'm going to spend my life with. And he walked in, sat at your table and behaved in that way and used that language and behaved as abominably as President Trump has and does. I think most right-thinking, moral people would be appalled. I can tell you, in my house, he would not be welcome. A person who behaves in such a way. I am amazed at my friends who are making apologies for and trying to explain away a set of behaviors and language and comments that are as appalling as his are. from a moral point of view, they're abhorrent. They're not just banter. It's not just that what do they like to say, that he's intemperate in his language, or he's not a practiced politician. President Trump may be lots of things, and he may eventually, and he may have policies that some people support and even delight in, but his attitudes and his actions around race are inexcusable to me. We have very little time left, but we do have a caller coming in. Go ahead, caller. Who do we have?
My name's Ricky, big fan of your show.
Hi, Ricky. How are you?
Good. Regarding your comments about President Trump, I think people have been using profane language in the White House for many, 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 many years. And Donald Trump, or President Trump, I'm glad you call him that, because a lot of people on the news call him Trump, which irritates me.
Right.
But I just think that he's doing a halfway decent job. The economy's doing good. Yeah, he's a little unique, I guess, and he could have proven a lot of ways. But you got to give him some credit where credit's due.
Well,
keep up the good work and have a good night.
Thank you, Ricky. I appreciate the call. And I do appreciate the call. Thank you, Ricky. And I don't come on here and talk about President Trump regularly. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that. I do so on this occasion because of the level of conversation. And it's not just, you don't have to think that people may or may not have used foul language in the Oval Office before. It's well documented. The Nixon tapes, at very minimum, show us that. And so, no, none of these people are icons, maybe icons. None of these people are perfect. They're not alabaster saints. And it's not, I'm not singling them out because of that. If he was using that word or the F word or other words about something, I could imagine a president getting very emotional about something and saying, whatever expletive, I'm not putting up with this, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So it's not so much the words that he used. And as I said, he may have some policies that people will support, and that's in the realm of policy where I like to live all day long. We can agree and disagree about policy, about what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. I take a different view than Rick does about his most of his policies thus far, but that's fine. We can have that. To be clear, my comments tonight have to do with the fact that instead of talking about the more uplifting and positive and enlightening and empowering things in the world, and especially around this weekend of Martin Luther King Day, that we usually spend our time, most years, spending some time contemplating those issues. This year, all of that was tarnished. And then the image and the good name of the United States was tarnished worldwide. And to think that perhaps it was done deliberately, that because it was blowback because of what had happened the previous day when Donald Trump had talked about a bill of love, and that whatever bill would come before him, regardless of what it was, that he trusted Democrats and Republicans to come together and bring him a bill. And whatever it was, he said, I will vote for it. And in the 24 hours or 48 hours between then and the time he made these awful statements, he, first of all, blew up in the face of the bipartisan body or group that came before him, refused to support the bill that they had put together that was going to meet $1.6 billion worth of funding for additional security on the border, plus solve the DACA problem and the other things. And he used this occasion to to throw some red meat to the far right of his base again, and to do that at the cost of people with little kids. I don't know what they say after last week. It's true, there's foul language being used by all kinds of people in the past, but to have it front and center and coming out of the mouth of a president, backing off of his long history of other terribly nasty, vulgar words and behaviour, I found it a step too far. And I just wanted to call it like it was, that that this is that was more than just regrettable. But thank you, Rick, for the call. I always appreciate people calling in, giving their point of view. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for another hour spent at Education Matters, and I look forward to speaking with you all next week again. Thanks a lot, and have a great week. Bye bye now.